Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Christen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Christen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so glad that you are listening today, and it is so great to be back and launch season 6. And guess what? The podcast just turned 4 years old last month since we launched in August 2020. So the podcast is 4 years old. Woohoo! Happy birthday. So if you've been listening from the beginning or you just started, I just want to thank you so much for being a listener. It has been such an amazing 4 years, and I am so glad to still be here and put out great content for you and your family. Just a couple of announcements to kick things off in this first episode of season 6. If you have not signed up for our newsletter already, I send out a monthly newsletter letting you know about our guest lineup, upcoming events and giveaways, and some fun family content that is sure to encourage you each month. So head over to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. Also, after many years of hoping and wishing, I have finally created a YouTube channel for the podcast. I know. Where have I been? Everybody's made a YouTube channel except me. So I'm in. I'm finally doing it. So that's where you'll find the full-length interview of each of my guests. And so you get to see what they look like. I always want that. Whenever I'm listening to a podcast, I wonder what they're doing, what they look like, what they're wearing. Well, now you can find out. So you can head over to the Collide Kids Podcast YouTube channel, and I will provide the link for that in the show notes and on my social media. So be sure to check that out. Well, season 6 is opening with a super exciting guest, especially if you are a big fan of the Wingfeather Saga. That's right. Today's guest is award-winning singer, songwriter, and author Andrew Peterson. He is also the founder of the Rabbit Room, an organization that fosters community through story and art and music. Andrew and his wife, Jamie, have 2 sons, Aiden and Asher, and 1 daughter, Sky. They live in the Nashville, Tennessee area on a wooded hill in a little house they call the Warren, where they are generally safe from bumpy dig toads and toothy cows. And if you've read the Wingfeather Saga, you know what that means. So here is my delightful episode with Andrew Peterson. Well, Andrew Peterson, this is such an honor to have you on the Collide Kids podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, this is so fun. I told you a few minutes ago, I'm a big fan of your music, and I have been for a long time. And now you're this accomplished author. I think this is so fun that we're going to get to talk to you about all those things today. Would you just introduce yourself for people that maybe not know who you are?
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Peterson. I just turned 50 last month, which feels very significant. My wife and I have been married for 29, almost 30 years now, and we have 3 grown children who are all married, and I became a grandpa last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Super fun season in our lives. I love it. And I started out as a songwriter when I first moved to Nashville about almost 30 years ago, and always loved stories. And after my first or second record, started working on my first book. And ever since, I've just kind of like bounced back and forth between writing books and making music and touring.
I love that. And I think it's so interesting that you're able to do both. You didn't have to lay down one to do the other. You didn't have to put away your music to be an author. You could kind of do both. Okay, I'm excited to talk to you about all these different things. But before we do that, because this is a show for kids, I always ask my guests to tell me a joke. So do you have a joke for us today?
Okay, so for some reason, whenever somebody says, do you have a joke, for like the last 10 years, I heard a friend of mine tell this joke, and this is the only one I can ever think of. So here we go. Ready?
Okay.
Why was the sand wet?
I don't know.
Because the seaweed.
The seaweed. Yes.
Yes, the seaweed. It's a perfect joke.
Well, this is so fun. Okay, so I love that you have jokes, and I love that you're a creative person. Let's talk a little bit about creativity, because I feel like that's something that lots of kids are good at. And then as an adult, we kind of lose the ability to be creative. So how can kids hold on to their creativity for the longest?
I think that sometimes we think about creativity in a way that isn't always helpful. When I was a kid, I was like usually getting in trouble because I was always drawing or reading books when I wasn't supposed to be reading, or reading books that weren't assigned. And my teachers would often say, Andrew, you're so creative. And I took that as this high compliment. You know, I thought, well, I am creative and I'm special. And the older I've gotten, the more I realized I really believe that one of the ways that we are made in God's image is that we are all creative people. Everyone is creative. A friend of mine, Jonathan Rogers, talks about how, like, if creativity is a pie, then the arts are only one slice of that pie.
Yeah.
And he kind of jokingly says, they're not even a very important part of it. They're like, we need creative people to build bridges, right?
Right.
We're doing this construction project at our house right now, and I'm watching these people build stuff, and I'm fascinated by their creativity and the way that they are literally showing up at work one day, and when they go home at the end of the day, there's something there that wasn't before, right? That's like literal creativity. And so creativity and imagination get conflated, and they're different things. So I would just argue that if you're a parent listening to this, then you are a creative person. If you wake up in the morning and you come up with a way to take care of your children for the course of the day, that is wildly creative. Teachers are incredibly creative. Pastors are creative. So I think it's like, you don't have to try to be creative. This is just how God made us. We're always making things. And so that gives us the freedom to lean into it. Like, if there's something that interests us, we don't have to be an artist, quote unquote, to do that thing. You just go do the thing. Like, it's like we can't help but shape the world around us in one way or another. For some people, that's music and books and painting or whatever. But for other people, it's math. You know, for some people, it's construction or cooking, whatever it may be. And so I just don't think it's possible to really lose your creativity.
I agree. And I love that on this show, I've interviewed so many different people who have so many different jobs. And they all say, like, this is just something I'm just so good at. Like, my friend who's an organizer, or my friend who's a high diver, they all are just, they've discovered this way that they love to express themselves, that they love to be creative. And you're right, it's not just about the arts. So do you feel like technology is something that gets in the way of creativity?
It can. Technology can be really helpful, but it can also, you know, it has to be a tool. And social media especially is just fine-tuned to hinder creativity. They use the phrase harvesting your attention. So it's like, there are people out there who are very smart, who are trying to find ways to keep you engaged with the internet. And every moment that you're on social media is a moment that you're not writing the book, or the song that you could be writing, or gardening, or whatever the thing is. And so I actually have an app on my computer called Self-Control. And when I turn it on, it stops me from accessing the internet for distracting websites for a set amount of time. And even if I restart my computer, I can't go online to those things. So when I sit down and I'm like, okay, it's time to work on chapter 17, I turn on that thing and I can feel my mind kind of clear. It's like, oh, I can't even go to these websites right now. So
yeah,
I'm not going to look at the news, and I'm not going to get sucked into Twitter or whatever the thing is. So yeah, technology can be helpful, but the older I get, the more analog I'm getting. I actually considered working on my new book with writing it longhand.
Really?
With a legal pad. Yeah, I mean, half the books that we grew up reading, from C.S. Lewis to Tolkien to everybody else, like, that's how they were written. We don't need a typewriter or a computer.
But
and
they're
so
nice.
There's a part of me that's like, right. But we lose something every time,
Yeah.
right? You lose a little something every time you make it more convenient. And there's a part of me that's like, do I have the guts to sit down and try to write a whole book with a pen?
Yeah.
So I'll get back to you on that. In the meantime, I'm very wary of technology.
Yes. I think you need to let us know if your next book is written on a legal pad. You need to write that down. This was written longhand. You need that
Yes.
credit. Like,
Exactly. Yes.
that's good. And I've written down the self-control app. I'm going to look into that for sure for myself, because that's definitely hard, because our computers are also made to get our attention. So our phones and our everything lights up and turns red, and you're like, I got to turn that off. I got to acknowledge that. And we've become slaves to it.
And we all know that it's bad for us, but none of us stop doing it, right?
Right.
I actually just bought a light phone. Have you heard of this? It's
No.
called a light phone. It's a phone that all it does is text and call. and it works kind of like an old iPod. You can upload MP3s to it to listen to music. And I am trying to figure out the best way to use it. Because when I travel, it's nice to have the iPhone with maps and everything.
Right.
But when I'm home and I'm working on my property or I'm working on my book, I'll just text everybody and say, hey, I'm on my light phone today. And again, I can feel like my brain open up. There's like a piece that comes because I know that, and I can't look up the name of that flower or that bug that I just saw. Right. So there are little annoying things about it. But then I'm like, maybe it's okay to not know everything all the time.
Right. Yeah. Why do we want to know everything?
To wonder. Right. And so I'm figuring it out. I think young people are figuring it out. My son and daughter-in-law, we were eating tacos with them and a bunch of their college friends. And we were talking about phones. And I was like, do you think people your age are aware of how bad this stuff is for us? And she was like, oh, yeah. She was like, yeah, look down the table. Do you see any iPhones? And I looked down and there were all these 20-somethings laughing and eating chips and salsa. I didn't see a single phone. And I was like, that's amazing. And she said, I see one phone, and looked at me, and I looked down and I realized that I was the only one that had my phone on the table. And she was like, it's our parents' generation that are more kind of addicted to this than the kids are, because the kids are kind of aware in ways that we weren't of how addictive this stuff is. So I was very convicted about that. Yeah. And I have a lot of hope that enough people are going to wise up and learn to put this stuff in its place, because it can be helpful. It can also be destructive. Right.
It's a tool and it's a resource, and it's good to have the access to those things. But like you said, not all the time. And we don't have to know everything. When we think of it, we don't have to think of like, what is that? And look it up. We can just go without knowing.
It's okay to not know.
That's right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Wingfeather. Now, I have been living under a rock because I was getting my master's degree. So I had a stack of books that I was going to read when I was done. So I just started Wingfeather. So I just finished book 1. I'm so fascinated by this series. I'm so excited to get into it with my kids as well. And I listened to the audiobook, which you read.
I did. I love to read. And they were written as read-alouds for my kids, and so it makes sense.
Yeah, well, and I love hearing when the author is reading the book. I think it just makes it come alive so much more. You get the feeling and the emotion behind it more than if someone else is reading it. So I love that you did it, and you had so many different voices, and you were able to pronunciate the words correctly, because there's so many interesting words in your book. So I have to know, how did you come up with this idea? Where did Wingfeather come from? We'll be right back after this. You know, raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
It's a combo of all the books that I ever read and all the movies I ever watched, and all the books that I wish I could have read, but they didn't exist yet, Mm-hmm. For me, I've always loved stories. I always wanted to make movies and write songs, and the songs that I was most attracted to were songs that were, had elements of story in them. Same thing with books. Adventure stories were big for me as a kid. And so I wanted to be an author before I was a songwriter. And when I was in high school, I tried writing in earnest. And then music just kind of took over, and I love to do music still. But it was like reading the Narnia books to my kids when they were little, reawakened this passion to try to write a story. I just needed to know what it was like to get inside a story and fight my way through to the end.
Yeah.
And so, I just talked to my wife and I said, hey, I think I'm going to really do it. And she was like, awesome. As long as you'll stop talking about it and just start doing it. And so, but the kids were really the thing. I really wanted my kids to have a story. And so I sat down and pretended like I was 12 and tried to write the story like that. Well, like, what would I most want to happen next? I know, a troll, that kind of thing. I remember what I most wanted was for people to get the sense in book 1 that, yes, there was some whimsy and it was supposed to be funny in places, but also that I wanted to telegraph that there was like this deep undercurrent. There was real danger and real stakes.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids were going to go on this really big, epic, serious adventure. It just so happened to be in a world with toothy cows and thwaps
Yes.
and funny names.
Yeah. So did the main character, Janner, did he reflect you as a 12-year-old, or did you put some of your personal influences into the book when the characters came out?
I mean, in some ways, every character in an author's book there's a little bit of the author and even the bad guys, right?
Right.
You can't help it. Definitely, there was this sense in which Janner in book 1 was growing up in this little town and kind of felt like he had a small life, but dreamed of having a bigger one.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot like me as a kid, probably like a lot of kids. But yeah, personality wise, yeah, there's plenty of me in Janner and in all of the kids in one way or another.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I also wanted to ask you about all these interesting words and plants and animals that you have created. Where did that come from? My nephew and we like to make up funny words. And so as you went through the story, you're like, I feel like we need something here. What do we put?
I also like to make up funny words, and
Okay.
it makes me really like your nephew even more. I remember when I was working on book 1, and it happened to coincide with Planet Earth, that show Planet Earth that came out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched it. Amazing nature documentary. And it was just like almost worshipful to watch that show because you're like, the world God made is just so incredible.
Yeah.
There's just this incredible breadth of creativity that we get to experience in our world. If you're writing fantasy, one of the cool things is that you get to make up all the rules in your world.
Yeah.
You get to decide, what level of technology they've figured out. You get to decide what the languages are like and the names. And there was one day when I was watching Planet Earth and I saw that there was this squid that they discovered in the deep ocean called the vampire squid of the deep.
Wow.
It's this, that's in our world, right?
Yeah.
It's called the vampire squid of the deep. And it's got tentacles that glow, the end of its tentacles glow red in the dark to distract its prey. And it shows this scene of this like creepy red tentacled thing with a mouth in the middle. And I was like, that is in our world right now.
Yes.
While you're listening to this podcast, that thing is lurking around in the Atlantic Ocean, right? And that just kind of exploded my imagination. I was like, I get to put whatever monsters I want in the forest. I get to give the cows fangs and make them carnivorous. And
Yes.
and all bets were off. I just had the best time. And so that turned into Pembroke's Creaturepedia, which is one of the side books, which is a kind of a bestiary that my son illustrated of all the creatures. And then he also illustrated the Ranger's Guide to Glipwood Forest, which is kind of a walking tour of the forest to help you survive all of the crazy monsters that
I
live
love
out there
that.
and the plants and all of that stuff. So.
That's so fun. Do you think when God was creating all these animals, he was like, what would be funny if we he's just because I feel like you said there's so many things that we don't even know about yet. There's things that have not yet been discovered. They're still discovering new species and plants and, God
Right.
created all of those at the beginning of time, and we get to experience this now.
Yeah. What a tragedy is that we're losing so much, right?
Yeah.
Like we haven't done a super great job of taking care of the world that God gave us.
Mhm.
And I think if we had this increased wonder and fascination with the world that God made, we would take better care of the place.
Absolutely. Well, you have a new book coming out, which is very exciting, and it's called The Prince of Yorsha Doon. Would you talk a little bit about this book, where it came from, and why you wrote it?
So one of the places in the books that we didn't get to visit in the main four book series is the woes of Shreve and the city called Yorsha Doon. And when I was a kid, I loved this book called The Black Stallion. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah.
But it involves this kid who was like in Arabia with this horse. And I remember loving Arabian Nights and Sinbad and all these kind of classic tales when I was a kid. And so I really wanted there to be this kind of like that vibe in this world. And so I imagined this place called Yorsha Doon. And when I drew the map for the story at the very beginning, I remember thinking, ooh, it's going to be fun to visit Yorsha Doon in this adventure at some point. But as it happens, the author isn't always in control and the story didn't go there. They never quite made it to Yorsha Doon. So it bothered me. So book 5 of the Wingfeather Saga is this collection of short stories by me and a bunch of other authors, all set in this world. And I knew immediately, I was like, I'm going to write a short story in Yorsha Doon. And so I wrote about this boy named Safiki, who is this kind of Aladdin type thief that lives in the city. And I loved the story. I had so much fun writing it. And then later, the publisher came and said, hey, we think that there should be a kid's book, like a picture book that parents can read to their younger children. And we adapted that story. And it's so smart. Jennifer Trafton is an author who adapted the story, took my story and turned it into this kid's book. And Christina Kister did all the illustrations, and it's like a puzzle. Like as you're reading the book, there's all these like secret codes that you have to unlock. And
fun.
It's kind of like Where's Waldo at times, so it's a very interactive way to dip your toes into the world of the Wingfeather Saga.
That's really cool. I love that it has lots of interactive elements to it. So that'll be a really fun book for really people. Fun. Not to get off the subject of writing, but one of the things I read about in your bio is that you are a beekeeper. And I've always wanted to talk to someone that was a beekeeper. So would you just share a little bit about how you got started caring for bees? And that's so far removed, I feel like, from creative elements of writing and music. So where did beekeeping come from?
Well, I mean, we live in the countryside outside of Nashville most of the year. And I love to garden and take care of the property. I have a tractor. I till things. I love to plant things. And in the process of learning how to take care of our property, I met one of our neighbors and he mentioned beekeeping. And I just kind of like you, I was like, man, I've always been interested in beekeeping. Like, tell me about beekeeping. Yeah. And like within 2 days, I had ordered my first packet of a queen and 1,000 bees. So he got me into it, and he was my bee mentor for like 5 years. It helps to have an actual person, not just YouTube, teach you how to do it.
Yes.
In pretty much every town, there's a beekeeping association. Just show up one day and say, I've always wanted to keep bees. And I promise you 15 people will come up to you and volunteer to teach you how to do it. And so it is fascinating. Like, it's kind of like the planet Earth stuff we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's just the most interesting and worshipful process. I'm not a great beekeeper, but like we just harvested honey a couple of weeks ago, and there is nothing quite like dipping your finger in a jar of honey that was made by bees on your own property.
Yeah.
I'm interested in a lot of things. It's part of the reason why I got into writing and music and whatever else, the animated series is. I'm pretty curious about how stuff works. And I'm not like quite smart enough to like do it on my own, but I keep bumping into people who open a door and I go, well, yeah, I want to see what that's like. And the next thing you know, I'm on a tractor or I'm harvesting honey or making a TV show.
I love what you said too, that having an actual person to talk to about it versus getting on YouTube. Because we always say that, like you can learn anything on YouTube, but when you ask someone about what they do or ask someone to teach you something, I feel like so many people love to do that. If that's their favorite topic, they love to share with you. And so we shouldn't be afraid to reach out and ask people to help us learn about things that we're curious about.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also have heard that bees are not doing so well, like the bee population is dwindling. And so is that true? Have you heard that?
It is true in a sense, but I've also heard the other side of the coin is that all these amateur beekeepers responded to that.
Oh.
And that's causing its own kind of problems. So
Okay.
I think ultimately bees are going to be fine.
Okay.
And also humans are kind of breaking the world right now. And so you never know.
Right.
So I think that definitely finding a way to engage with creation, especially if you're a Christian, is so crucial.
Yeah.
The ancient Christians used to say there were 2 books of Revelation. They would say there's the book of Scripture and there's the book of nature.
Yeah.
That God has revealed himself to us in these 2 ways. One of them is the Bible and the other one is the world that he made. So there's so much to be learned about him. And we live in this weird sliver of human history where very few of us in America grow our own food. There's just like practical things we don't do so much anymore. We leave it to other people. And beekeeping, for example, is just one of the many ways that we get to learn about the mind of God, and you get honey, and
which is the best
you help
part.
the flowers.
That's right.
Right. For a square mile radius, you get to help all of nature, kind of thrive a little better than it was before. So I think if everybody listening to this decided to grow a tomato plant or keep bees, then there would be this like ripple effect of all this goodness in the world. There are lots of great Christian organizations that are waving their hands and saying, hey, this is one of the ways that the Christians need to like participate with God in the coming of the new creation, you know? And so,
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good note. Well, Andrew Peterson, this has been so fun talking with you, and I am so fascinated by all the things that you're doing, and I hope that your new book does really well. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for families to get their hands on, so I hope they'll go and get that. Before I let you go, I always ask my guests to tell me a memory from when they were a kid. So will you share with us? Oh,
man. So many memories. It's funny. I tend to remember the bad ones, you know, like sad memories.
Yeah.
I'm a songwriter, and so I thrive on sadness. But I did remember a couple of funny ones. So this will tell you a lot about how I'm wired. When I was growing up in Illinois, there was a cornfield in our backyard, and about 100 yards into the cornfield, there was a train track that was on this raised berm. And I don't think it was fenced. And there was this massive rule: do not go to the train track. And of course, I went to the train track. I don't recommend this, but I have this vivid memory of the feeling of danger of climbing through the corn stalks, you know, with my brother, and just catching a glimpse of the train track. It was very fascinating. But this sense that the world had mystery in it and danger in it, and was very prevalent in my mind. But the thing that I really wanted to tell you was that my grandma in Florida, in South Florida, she lived in the swampy part of South Florida that I kind of think of as like the Dagobah system in Star Wars, where Yoda lived. And my grandma kind of looked like Yoda, and so that helped. And so, but she was great. But I remember she lived in this jungly part of South Florida. They were dairy farmers, and there was an alligator that my brother and I tried to kill with a 2x4. So, you know, hunting alligators. And I was thinking about that because it feeds so much into, that's the same kid that ended up writing the Wingfeather Saga.
Right. Absolutely.
So, like, I don't recommend it. If you're a kid out there and you live in Florida, do not try to kill an alligator. Do not go to the train track. But you can read stories about that.
Like, Mom, Andrew Peterson said I could, so it's okay. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your books?
Just go to andrew-peterson.com or wingfeathersaga.com. And if you want to see the TV show, which is awesome, season 2 is releasing, and we're dipping our toes into season 3 of the animated series, and that's at angel.com.
Okay.
So if you go to any of those places, you can find out all kinds of fun stuff.
Awesome. I hope they'll do that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was great meeting you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
What a creative guy, making up words and maps and creatures. That must be so much fun. I really love all of the encouragement that Andrew gave us today to think about how much time we're spending on screens and how that can take away from our creativity and the things that we should be making and building and putting together. If you have not yet discovered the Wingfeather Saga, or you're just like me and you're just starting out, I encourage you to read this series. And like Andrew said, these were meant to be read aloud. So this would be such a fun family activity to read these books. You can also watch the Wingfeather Saga, which is also an animated series, on the Angel Studios app. And be sure to head over to his website, andrew-peterson.com, to learn more about his music and order your copy of his brand new interactive book, The Prince of Yorsha Doon. I think that's going to be such a fun book for you to get your hands on. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So here is my friend Reagan.
Hi, my name is Reagan, and what did the policeman say to his belly button? You're under a vest.
Do not say that to a police officer if you get pulled over. But that is a really good policeman joke. I like that. That was fun. Thank you, Reagan, for sharing that with us. Hey, if you'd like to be like Reagan, you too can be on the podcast. All you have to do is head over to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and click the tab that says Kids Only. There you can record yourself telling a joke or a Bible verse or a song or a quote from a movie. Anything you want to share, you can do that there, and I might put you on the next episode. And while you're there, go ahead and sign up for the monthly newsletter. There are a lot of great ways for you to support the podcast, and one of those is to leave a rating and a review on your podcast app. When you do that, it really does help other people find out about the show, and I always love reading those and hearing about what you think. You can also head over to my website and click the link that says support. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. Well, I hope you have some time this week to be creative. Go read a book together as a family and do something that's fun and not on screens, okay? And in case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so very much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.